Hi, everyone. So this is the final segment in the topic of selection. Selection is the biggest part of the HR chapter. So I hope it's okay that I've done it in 4 parts and that it takes a long time to go through all of them, because this really is one of the biggest parts of human resources. So let's dive right in. So selection tools. Selection tools that we've talked about, and a few that we've not talked about before. We talked about collecting information. We talked about the value of having a CV, having applicants apply and answer questions, and having a resume. That has decent validity, but of course, people can lie on their application, people can lie on their CV, so there needs to be some verification to make sure that what they've said is true. References. References are when you have people who can talk about you, can give information about you. So typically people have 3 professional references that are people who can speak about their abilities. And this actually, when I first was a student, I thought this probably won't have high validity because people will most likely select people who will say great things about them. I've learned in calling references that that's not often true. Often people list references that are not people who are supportive, okay? So Steve's tip for you is when you're choosing a reference, number 1, make sure that you ask them if they can be a reference. I often receive phone calls or messages, hello, Mohammed has listed you as a reference. And honestly, I've had many Mohammeds over the many years that I've been here. And so if I get a reference request and I don't know who the student is, I just have to say, I'm sorry, I don't know who the student is. So 1, request, and number 2, make sure it is a good reference. Because I once had an employee I fired ask me if I can be a reference. And I had to say, you don't want me as a reference. I can't give you a good reference. I had to fire you. So anyhow, make sure to ask, and to make sure to ask if it'll be a good reference. Referrals from employees. Referrals from employees are a very valid way to get new people. What a referral is saying, hey Steve, you are a teacher, you know other good teachers, who can you recommend to come here to UAU? That's an example of a referral, okay? And this has high validity because if I think somebody is a good teacher, I'm gonna be happy to have them as a coworker. If I think the person is a bad teacher, then I'm not gonna want to bring them in here and embarrass myself that we brought in somebody who's not a good teacher. So the importance of referrals. We talked about tests. Tests have very high validity if it's a good test. If it's a bad test, yeah, not so much. And we talked about that it can be a test for knowledge and a test for personality. These things can be valid and reliable if done right. If the job requires lifting a lot of heavy stuff, then you can give them a physical ability test. So if the job requires that you're going to be lifting things or strenuous work, a lot of work, then it's okay to give them a test. Show us that you can do this job. Makes sense. Performance test. So I want to tell a story on this one. Performance test, I'll tell the story after I explain it. A performance test is having the candidate demonstrate that they know how to do the job by having them do what's called a job sample. And an example of this is at the last place I worked at in America, the last university I was teaching at, we required every person who applied to give a teaching demonstration. So we made them come in and stand in front of us for 15 minutes and do a teaching demonstration. And this was excellent because, at least in one instance, we had somebody who had prior teaching experience at 2 other universities. The person was in the interview went well. We were ready to give her a teaching job because everything else matched. But then when we asked for her to do the teaching sample, well, I'll show you how that went. Before I explain that, I need to give you a little more information. The person we're interviewing was a woman. The example, we also interviewed bad male teachers, so this is not a gender thing. It's not women are better, worse teachers or whatever. The people who were interviewing her were myself, a colleague named Martha, female friend, and a colleague named Linda, who was actually my department chair, another female friend. So to be clear, the story I'm telling here has nothing to do with teachers being male, female, whatever. I'm just giving you a story from my past, okay? So this is somebody we think we're going to hire, and she's standing in front of Martha, me, and Linda, and we're acting like we're students in a classroom. So now, pretend that I am the candidate. This is what she did. Diversity is a relatively new subject in the context of the Arab world, but diversity policies are slowly developing. Okay? I interrupted her and said, you can go to the board, you don't have to just read, you can actually write, you can use PowerPoint, whatever you'd like. And she said, no, that's okay. And then she went on. While this remains a delicate issue, observing and understanding diversity will help in recognizing its importance in the human resource management world. So that was her teaching demonstration. I was sitting in the room, and it went for 15 minutes, by the way, of her just reading to us. I was sitting in the room, and it was like one of those moments where you think there's a hidden camera, because the teaching demonstration was so bad, I thought, this has to be a prank. This can't be real, okay? Meanwhile, my 2 friends, Martha and Linda, they are sitting there and they're just taking notes and they're writing, and I'm looking at them and I'm like, what are you taking notes on? This is terrible. What are you doing? So the interview was over. We shook hands with the candidate. We thanked her for coming. And then after she left, I asked Martha and Linda, what? And they started laughing. They said, Steve, we knew she was horrible, so we knew we weren't hiring her. And so both of them, the interview was on a Thursday, and in America, a lot of people go shopping on Friday. And so they were writing out their grocery list. So their response was, we knew we aren't hiring her, and so we're gonna make use of our time. Meanwhile, I was freaking out the entire time thinking, are you seeing something good? Are you seeing, no. So anyhow, this is an example of where job samples are actually a very good thing to do. And that brings me to the last topic of interviews. The last selection tool that we're going to talk about are interviews. And as I said above, I said in a previous interview, interviews done right can be very useful. They can have decent validity, they can have reliability, but unfortunately, interviews are often done wrong. And when they're done wrong, they actually have low validity. And here's why. There are 2 types of problems with interviews. There is what's known as the false positive. And what a false positive is when the candidate comes in and when you interview the candidate comes off awesome. And I've seen this. I've seen this both here at UAU when we interview people, and I've seen this back in previous jobs that I've had in HR. The candidate comes in And when you interview them, they are awesome. Hire me and I will solve all of your problems. I can do this and I can do this and I can do that, and you will be amazed when you hire me. That can be a false positive, because sometimes you hire that person and they can do all these things, but sometimes you hire that person and the person who shows up, hello, and you look at them and you think, wait a minute, I remember the guy we interviewed, and the guy we interviewed was awesome, and you're not. So what happened? Were you lying to us? What happened? And so that's a false positive. A false negative can also happen. I saw this happen a couple of years ago. Interviewing somebody who wanted to come here. And I don't know why. We had references on the person. This guy was a good teacher. He had a good background in teaching in the Arab world. Everything about him was solid. And people who knew his teaching said he was good, okay? In the interview, I don't know why, but his hands were shaking. And because he was nervous, he couldn't answer questions well. He came across in the interview very, very poorly. It can happen. After the interview was over, I said, I cannot claim that was a good interview, but everything else about this guy, it might be worth considering giving him a chance. The other people who were on my team were like, are you serious? He was terrible in the interview. And I'm like, you're right, he was terrible in the interview. But this is what's known as a false positive. He gave a positive interview, false negative. He gave a bad interview, but if you hire him, the experience that he's shown us is that he can probably do the job. So anyhow, good interviews have high validity, bad interviews don't. And you're saying to yourself, but Steve, I'm a college student. No one's going to want to interview me. And I'm ending this with a very smart observation from a friend of mine in HR. So this is the way a smart HR manager friend of mine advises her team. She says, focus on the knowledge, skills, and abilities that are usually acquired by a bachelor's degree in 5 years of experience. If that's what the job requires, you can focus on that. But don't focus on the degree and experience unless it is required by law or a governing body. Now, that may sound confusing. Let me interpret that for you. In other words, prove you are a solid candidate. And even if you don't meet the job specifications perfectly, a good HR team will consider you. So I know we have a lot of students who fear the chicken and egg problem. The chicken and egg problem in human resources is that all the good jobs ask for 5 years of experience, but how can you get the 5 years of experience unless you get the job in the first place? So that's the chicken and egg. Which comes first? How can I get the experience unless somebody gives me a chance? And so my HR friend, the way she advises her team is for you to prove that you are worth not having the experience. You're going to get the degree. You're at UAU. You're going to get the degree. Now, find a way to prove that you're worth hiring, even if you don't have the experience. And then my bottom line is, in selection, the goal is to get a good person for the job. And too often, in my country at least, people ask for, but we must have the best person. No, is the perfect person for a job only occurs in luck or in fiction. And I'm somebody who deals in the real world. We're not going to have perfect. And so finding somebody who's good, that's what's important. So anyhow, this wraps up selection. Thanks for watching these long videos. I hope it was useful. Bye-bye.